And what I found out is that really in food, anything is possible if you keep asking questions.
Hi, Julia. If you don't mind, will you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Absolutely. So I'm Julia Stamberger. I'm the co-founder and chief executive officer of the Planting Hope Company.
I'm so pleased to have you here and to learn more about your story.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for the invitation and for being interested in what we're up to.
Yeah, it's very unique. I really love when you get into comparing the different kinds of plant-based milks out there. But before we go there, just a little bit about your background, because I think your United story is really cool, and we all eat that weekly, don't we?
It actually saved my life about 2 weeks ago. So
starving on an airplane?
Yeah, pretty much. So so I actually got into the food industry through a roundabout way. When United Airlines was going through bankruptcy and reorganization challenges about 20 years ago, I came in to help both invest in new lines of business that were unrelated to ticketing and also figure out what could United do internally that would help to support that. And at the time, a lot of things were changing. The competition was coming in from the low-cost carriers like JetBlue and Southwest, who were flying on the same route structure, but without the same cost structure. And airlines, it's hard to make money when you have a lot of fixed overhead costs and fluctuating things like fuel prices. And so the major carriers had decided, hey, any additional costs that put us outside of the mark we need to look at. And one of those was free meals in economy, which were still a thing back then on domestic flights of a certain length. And just collectively, everyone said, you know what, we're just going to get rid of this because JetBlue and Southwest don't have it, and so we'll eliminate that cost. And the caterers said, well, cool, we get it, but that was kind of our business. We still think people want to eat. We'll sell fresh sandwiches and salads as a concession. We'll share the profits. Everybody wins. What do you think? And the carrier said, okay, sounds good. Well, the challenge is predicting the number of people that want to eat on an individual flight is very, very hard to get right. It can vary wildly on very, very small numbers. And so what ended up happening is they'd go to sell meals, and one day you'd sell 2, and the next one you'd sell
run
10,
out.
Or you'd run out. Absolute flight attendants don't like it when you run out, by the way, because then they have angry passengers. So sometimes they just wouldn't sell them if they didn't think there were enough, So it became a giant mess because the problem with the fresh food was based on, meaningful health regulations, of course we should do, you had 2 flight legs to sell through that food before you had to throw it away. So you either, sold through the product and had a customer service issue, or you had extra and you had a cost issue. And either way, it didn't work. So the caterers went back to the airlines. They're like, funny thing, not exactly going the way that we would hoped. We still think this is a big customer service and something you need, but we also need you to cover our losses because we're losing a lot of money. Clearly, during a bankruptcy reorganization, there wasn't a lot of extra cash. So United ended up cutting those programs on most of its flights, keeping them where it thought it absolutely had to be competitive, ran into a lot of issues for other things we were trying to do on the airline. So I took a look at it and I'm like, okay, this is really getting in my way. Can I fix this?
Yeah, solve the problem.
Right. So we can get back to doing some of the other things we wanted to launch. And the solution I came up with was, okay, if you look at what happens on an airline from a catering standpoint, there are certain products that get reprovisioned. Liquor minis, we don't throw those away just because the flight's over. Cocktail snacks, same thing. So if you develop shelf-stable food, that doesn't have a short expiration date. That has the expiration date that's marked on the package. Can you create a shelf-stable meal equivalent that has all the components of a fresh meal, but's delivered in a package format? And the longer you can extend that shelf life, the longer you have utility. Well, that changed the game. Now you have a meal that, first of all, people know what they're eating. All the ingredients are packaged. It's shareable. You can eat some now, you can eat later. It's not a mystery sandwich. But also the airline can board as many as they'd like. So let's say you have what's called an IROP situation, irregular operations. Something goes wrong. You've got plenty of food on board.
Right.
And actually, ironically, a couple of months ago, I was on a United flight. I was in business. And we're like, is there supposed to be a meal? This is a long flight. And I came and they're like, we're terribly sorry. The ovens aren't working. Would you like a snack box?
And you're like,
I'm
yes, I created those. Do you know?
Yes, indeed. I'll take one of each.
There's nothing worse than being delayed on a flight and you're starving and there's nothing to eat. And it's true. You just really need some protein, some cheese, some hummus,
Yep.
then I'm good.
Yep.
But yeah, it does
Absolutely.
make for very crabby people when they're
Do you know I
starving.
put the first shelf-stable hummus ever on an aircraft, and nobody knew what it was. They're like, "Is this gonna sell? What is it?" I'm like, "It's bean dip," and yes, and now it's the top item across all domestic carriers.
Yeah, it's my favorite. It's my go-to.
Excellent.
So that's very cool. And then you ended up leaving the airline after.
Yeah. So about I would say about I don't know 14 months or so after I launched the first program. It was going very well for United, and other carriers were like, oh, I see United's doing something interesting there. We're going to do that. But it's not as simple as just knocking over a vending machine and putting it into a box. That wasn't what made it work. In fact, to get the products for most of those items, they required complete customization. If you have the salami today that's on the United flight still, we developed that 20 years ago, specifically custom for airline purposes, which was a single serve of salami with very thin slices and cleaner ingredients than were currently available, but yet an extended shelf life. And to get products that really worked in that environment, nothing was available off the shelf. Even the hummus that you're used to now, it all required working, not with the big guys, because I tried that. I tried going to Frito-Lay and saying, hey, we're interested in this. And they're like, buy it for Dot Foods with 2 months of shelf life. But that doesn't work. I need a year of shelf life. I need longer than you're able to provide. I need cleaner ingredients than you have on your label. And what I found out is that really in food, anything is possible if you keep asking questions. So I would go to food shows and talk to, hundreds of vendors. Every single manufacturer or brand I could find, from the beginning of the show to the end. And I'd look for certain things. And I'd find 10 people who were like, nope, can't do it, can't do it, can't do it. And then I'd find the 11th who's like, oh, yeah, we know how to do that, or we can do that.
Or that's
we developed
intriguing
it.
and we're curious.
Maybe we
Love
can
that.
figure it out. And so, again, anything is possible. You can have cleaner ingredients. I talked to a meat manufacturer once who I said, it's a great product. The additives, BHA and BHT, these aren't great, though. What do we do? And they're like, oh, well, we could use celery salt. I'm like, I'm sorry, what celery salt? Like in my kitchen celery salt? And mind you, this happens all the time right now, but this was like, 2005.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we developed that at one point. Canadians wanted it. And I'm like, well, why don't you do it every day? And they're like, well, there just wasn't a reason to change. Stagnation is a major thing in food.
Right.
Food manufacturers are not necessarily the people who are actually manufacturing the food every day, the ones who are driving the change. It is innovative startups who see an opportunity, who believe in the market need, and who bring it to market, and then they have customers on the other side that say, yes, I want
love
that.
That's so true. I think that the emerging companies are putting stress on the big CPGs, though, because they're moving so much faster and innovating so much faster that they realize that they have to. It's a good thing, I think, for our world. And I think that's a good segue into planting hope, because you saw a blue ocean. I feel like you saw this. There's nothing in the market that hits this need. So I'd love you to talk about you and your founders, this is what we believed could be possible.
So it's interesting, as you mentioned, it's the innovative companies that are driving this and the CPGs that are trying to keep up. That dynamic did something else, which is it pulled in a gold rush into the natural community. And that caused a lot of problems. So, harken back to the early 2000s. You had an industry that was starting to show up on the radar, not only at Whole Foods and other natural stores, but it was crossing into mainstream. And it was starting to eat into the ACV and the margins and the sell-through and the velocity of the big guys. So they noticed. So they first tried to compete, and then figured out it was very hard for them to be nimble enough to create an authentic brand. And then they're like, well, let's buy them. And the value became a multiple of revenue. This is where stuff went off the rails. A multiple of revenue is based on, the sales that you have at grocery and your percentage of ACV, your penetration. It did not take into account the value of things like food service and other channels, because what was important to the CPG guys was, is there demonstrated opportunity here? Is there enough velocity that we could take this and plug it into our model and take it to 70% ACV overnight and improve the margins and the rest? If so, we're interested in paying a multiple of revenue for that. And that was the important point, the multiple of revenue. That's what started to destroy our industry. Because what happened was venture capitalists saw this and they're like, ooh, gold rush. If it's a multiple of revenue thereafter, then what we need to do is to get up distribution. We're going to come in, we're going to invest in these startup companies. We're going to grow that distribution. We don't care about profitability. We care about top line revenue because that's how these valuations are being done. And we're going to push as hard as possible for that to get the numbers up because at a multiple of revenue basis, we'll have CPG firms who are competing to buy these authentic, innovative brands and drop them into their portfolio. And that's what happened. There's a brand that you're well familiar with that was started in Chicago where I heard the story of what happened in the room when they were up for sale. And the bankers opened the bids from 3 financial buyers, and they were all about $100 million.
Yeah.
Then they opened the bids from the strategic CPG buyers. 400, 500, ultimately $600 million won the day.
Wow.
It's a lot of money, and the VCs made a lot of money as a result. The venture capital model is as such. It's just like the record industry. You raise a fund, you get a management fee and a percentage of that fund on behalf of your LPs. You do it with a mandate, and our mandate is maybe beverage companies or a snack thesis or whatever it is. Then you go and you make investments and deploy the capital along that mandate. Your goal is to get a couple that hit, and you know that you'll have a bunch that fail. And you pump money into them at terms that ensure that your investors are protected. Fine. Here's what that does on the other end. The entrepreneurs often get crammed down. They get preferred money on top of their common shares. The friends and family who came in early and supported them also got the common shares. When there's money on the table and something's preparing for a sale, oftentimes the founders start to get pushed aside a little. Hey, you're really good at product. Maybe you just run product or marketing or become a brand ambassador, but running the company, leave that to the money guys. And then they start putting in their own people. Becomes very white, becomes very male because venture capital is primarily white and male. And
you
it
had
also,
said something like only 2% is given to women in venture capital money.
It's so
right?
small. It's the statistics I think change and vary and go up and down, and venture capital's upside down right now. But if you look at the evolution of companies where they started, at least 50-50 women and entrepreneurs of color, and where they end up at the time of sale process, it's very different. Miyoko's Kitchen is a good example.
That's
of
exactly who I was thinking of, and she was
Yeah.
very public about getting pushed out of her own business, and it hit close to home, having my own business. I thought, that's why I don't talk to venture capital.
her own business that she'd independently gotten to $280 million. And I think the quote that was most poignant that came out of that is, well, you got it from, 0 to 1. We're here to take it from 1 to 100. Cool. Remember, a lot of venture capitalists also have no operating experience. Very few of them have ever actually run a company. Sometimes things look good on paper, but how you actually deploy them is different. Now, like anything, not everybody's alike. But you asked about the opportunity that we saw, and here's what it was. As that money came in and as the incentives were changed, they were no longer about creating the best products for the earth and the best products for people. They were about creating the products that were going to drive those upward multiples and be competitive at a sale. So, good news is that people were really embracing better for you, health and wellness, better for me, better for the planet. They were shopping more at Whole Foods, they were shopping more at natural stores, and they were really desirous of these products for a whole host of reasons, from, allergens to vitality and longevity to whatever it might be.
Right, and not always, I love how you mentioned it's not always the vegan vegetarian.
Yeah.
Excuse me, it's the flexitarian or wants to really help with earth and sustainability. So yeah, definitely seeing growth.
Everybody has the desire to, feel better and live longer. And it's either their desire or that of their family members that they do so.
Right.
One way or another.
And on a good planet, if we
Yes,
can do that.
Exactly. So, if you can marry all of those things, great. That's why the early, health and wellness movement was so important. And by the way, when I went to Natural Products Expo West in the beginning, when I was doing the United programs and things in the early 2000s, there were a lot of co-op buyers, who looked like traditional co-op buyers. You could bring your kids. People had babies strapped to them. They were going out and buying for their stores. Hearken to today, and it is mostly guys in khakis and and
So venture
Timberland
capital
vests.
behind
And
a lot
yes.
of. So did
who are
you
out
start
there.
with venture capital? I believe it did, right? And then you went to the Canadian stock market.
So we didn't actually. We didn't start with venture capital because I had the experience once in taking the wrong venture capital and seeing how that played out in my own business. The way venture capital was playing out then in the core market, and this is where we saw the opportunities, was people were trusting that Whole Foods and the natural products would have, great products, and therefore they weren't looking that closely. And here's what happened. People started adopting plant milk in droves. And what drove it wasn't necessarily that plant milk tasted better or any of the other things that drove a lot of other categories. It was one very simple thing. 75% of the planet is intolerant of dairy. And it can be at one level or another. You can age into it, you can age out of it. But the reality is people tend to feel better on a macro basis if they are drinking plant milk 75% of the time. In some populations, it's more aggravated. Yep, because the enzymes aren't there naturally to process
and they
it.
didn't grow up with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And so it's, unlike things like plant meat, plant meat is an alternative that's based on perhaps health and wellness, but very few people are allergic to meat. So the driver was significant there. The products, however, weren't that great. Almond milk sounds good because almonds are good for you, right? And you could make an extremely nutritious almond milk at home. But if you commercialized it, it'd be $20 a liter.
That's a really big point, that it's just not commercially viable.
No, it's not. And it can be wonderfully good for you. But the reality is the product that you're buying at the grocery store that's, $2.50 a liter is made from the dust remaining from almond processing. And if you look at the nutritional label, there's no protein in it.
Yeah.
Because it's effectively flavored vitamin water. So people say, okay, well, I'm eating almonds. Almonds are good for me. Yes, almonds are, but you're not getting that from almond milk because there aren't really any almonds in almond milk. It's like 6 to 10 per liter.
And they always talk about, and you talk about the amount of water it takes to make almond milk. So it's
The amount of water is extraordinary. It is crazy big. But also, almond groves are a really valuable crop. And therefore, they're pretty much all soaked in pesticides. And because they're monocultures, they're trees, that soil doesn't get turned over or modified. Almonds also require bees for pollination. And during a 6 to 8 week window, you got to have bees or you're not going to get almonds. So millions of bees actually, are trucked to the almond groves during this period. We already had a bee shortage. 30% of them die.
And can't they find a better way to get them there? Do we need refrigerated trucks? Do we need
Well, first of all, excellent point. But what's killing half of them is the pesticides.
Oh.
So it's a combination of the stress, yes, absolutely, but also what they're eating is not good for them, and that is another problem. By the way, what you're eating comes from there, so we'll just leave it there.
Right.
But no, almonds aren't great for the earth, and there are certain crops that we rely on now for nutrition: almonds, quinoa, avocados. Here's the news. 50 years from now, these will not be a core food source that we're using, any of them.
It's going to be crickets.
It probably will. It's a lot of alternative proteins because we don't have the resources as a planet to scale these crops effectively. So they're not going to be able to feed us.
I think I heard you saying that in California, they're taking out the almond and in Turkey that's growing? And talk.
Yeah. So in California now, because of the limited access to water, it's not viable for farmers in a lot of places. And the thing is it takes 7 years to grow a tree too. That's another reason it won't scale. So other countries that can farm things are stepping in, like Turkey. But again, it takes 7 years to catch up. So we don't necessarily have a shortage that's visible to you at the grocery store today. But I guarantee you, a few decades from now, it will be very, very prominent.
And like really expensive because they're coming from Turkey.
It is interesting when you look at the global food supply and food security and how nations look at food security and how much is imported. Right now in the U.S., we import most of our peas. Why can't we grow peas domestically? We have to get all of our pea protein from Canada. It's because the way we've set up agriculture subsidies in the U.S. is based around animal agriculture. So a farmer can farm soy or corn and get crop insurance for that. And even if the crop fails, they still make money. But if they farm something like peas, which, by the way, are a cover crop, it can help with the soil and the rest, and that fails, there's no insurance for those.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. It is. And so one of the things that I've been working on together with the Plant-Based Food Association, where I'm on the board of directors, is on lobbying in D.C. to provide things like crop insurance for other crops. So where we
and even the awareness, quite frankly, the awareness to just any U.S. citizen that even is a thing. And I think that is a good point about associations. I mean, that is what one of their biggest powers is. So I'm on the Flavor and Extract Manufacturers Association, and it's just being aware of this kind of, and educating Congress, important.
Educating the consumer who's also gotten so confused by all the information we've thrown at them about food and, what's good for you, what's bad for you, it changes, and eventually...
And what's good for the planet, you think that, it's plant-based, it's good, but it's like,
Yeah.
Dig a little deeper, and you're like,
maybe not so much.
Yeah.
So here's what people do. They say, enough. I'm just going to eat what tastes good.
Right. And taste at the end of the day will always be crucially important, or you're not going to go back.
Number one.
I think back to your product, which I really do love, and love that you got it to foam. And there's just so many cool food science aspects of this. I'd love you to talk more about it and how it took you guys 5 years. And I'm curious about the bitter masking because that's in our
world. So when we stepped back and we looked at when we decided to start the Planting Hope Company, our 4 founders, myself and 3 others, we'd all spent a lot of time in the food industry, and some decades more than I had.
Do you have a food science? I know your background's not food science, but you sound like a food scientist a lot. Learned it on the
job.
Nice.
Yeah. From the people.
So you also have a creative writing background, which my son just graduated with, and I
really?
love that.
Very cool. That's really...
It's important, right?
Very
so many
important.
people don't know how to write. And
I think kids today think AI will take care of those holes. They won't.
No. It loses the emotion.
Well, I find that actually as an entrepreneur, I spend most of my days communicating, and writing is part of that.
Probably 80% of my job, I would say, writing to some degree.
Yep.
So,
That's impressive. Your son did that. That's awesome.
I love it. He's interning right now for one of my girlfriends owns Jane Agency, so he's doing copywriting. He's loving it. He's loving it. That's cool.
That's awesome.
So didn't mean to digress there.
No, that's great. Look, I've got 4 kids between 1 and 11, and
so I knew you had a baby. I didn't know 1. I thought a little older. So 1 and 11.
She's, 18 months at this point. Yeah,
that's a lot. Oh, we could totally go there too of how you balance all of that. That is a lot.
Well, I don't have a social life, so there you go.
That helps, but it doesn't help. You need it.
Well, yes. I mean, in theory,
balance of all of it is.
Well, I know one of the reasons my schedule got a little out of whack today is one of them had a terrible cold and was up all night. So there's always a plot twist.
Always, and remaining flexible is key, and having a tribe of help.
Yes, and a husband who has job security as my husband, because what would I do? What would I do
way off the rails
him?
And you'll still be needed.
He'll still be, So there's that.
Oh, that's good.
So why did we do what we're doing? So I had all the years since United in food, but, one of my business partners, 45 years of driving sales and brand development in this industry, Tofurkey and Mama Chia and Nut Pods and a lot of brands that exist today are because of folks like him who came to the industry and were at the natural products expos back in the early 80s where it was a handful of booths and they would literally pull the fire drill to go out and smoke pot.
Yeah, that's hysterical.
So
it's a good call.
Well, it's now when there's 150,000 people there, you probably the
now
cops will
everyone's
show
smoking pot everywhere, so it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't matter anymore. There's actually a section for that at Expo these days. But back in the day, so these are the guys that really were, the innovation and had the dream and cared about, the planet and the ethics and the people and drove this whole organic movement, like literally an organic movement about driving organics and better things into our soil. Mm-hmm. And they were the folks who put heart and soul into it way before the money came. And they didn't expect the money, that they were doing it for
the good of all.
Exactly. And so anyway, when we, took a look at this industry and saw it change, we saw these massive, rapidly growing globally as well, not just in the U.S., segments that were driving health and nutrition. And things like plant-based milk were going especially quickly because one of the things that had been changing is bringing cafe culture to the globe. It started as a European thing, then it came to the US, then Starbucks grew up, then everybody was looking for better coffee and different coffee and a demand around plant-based milk as a result. And so that, there's plant-based milk at grocery, but then when you look at plant-based milk and beverage, whether that be boba tea or smoothies or coffee and tea, it's a market that is equally as big, if not larger, than what you see in the grocery stores.
Yeah.
And yet, the alternatives that were out there, first, primarily almond. And there are plenty of other nuts like almond, like walnuts and peanuts, and you see milks that are based on everything, same process. And when you look at the nutritionals, you'll get the same sort of nutritionals. So that's one subcategory. Soy also had its moment and had been driving since Steve Demos really, pushed silk to market in the 90s. And so soy milk, while packed with nutrition, soy is actually a very, very nutritious product. It is, like nuts, a top allergen. Mm-hmm. Typically, folks who are intolerant of dairy also have some other allergens,
Right.
backing those. But soy also has a very strong taste. And so, if you're doing certain things with it, fine. If you're putting it in coffee, it changes the taste of the coffee. You've got to love that. And baristas hated both of these products. They hated soy and they hated almond. Neither one of them would do what baristas wanted to do, which is what they could do with dairy: froth, foam, steam, and deliver it in, beautiful hot beverages in a way that also didn't change the taste of the natural beans, which was what they were priding themselves on.
You'll be proud of us this morning. We have a Keurig that's got the little frother on the side.
Yeah.
So we were frothing.
Did you froth it up?
It frothed.
It does?
It does. Yes, it was very good. But we did notice as it cools, the bitterness, you can sense that bitterness. So that's why I was interested in that. And that's bitter is the most challenging note to mask.
It is. And, but bitter is one of the things that makes sesame awesome as a crop. Mm-hmm. So as we were taking a look at this market, we said, okay, can we do better than, almond? Can we do better than soy? Oat was just starting in the U.S. But when you look at oat and oat milks like Oatly, they're enzymatically processed. So for those of folks who are listening who don't understand the enzymatic process and what it does, if you take corn, you apply it, you get high fructose corn syrup. It alters the natural sugars in the corn. Mm-hmm. You apply the same process to oats, you get maltose. And maltose has a glycemic index around 105. By comparison, a can of Coke has a glycemic index around 65. And you're getting a type of sugar that's very dangerous for type 2 diabetics and others who don't expect it. And it's also not labeled on the product in a way that people can identify that as well.
Oh, that's interesting because it's naturally occurring, so to speak, right? Is that why they don't have to put it in?
So it has to be labeled as added sugars, but it doesn't have to be labeled as maltose.
Okay.
So people know that they're getting sugar, but they don't know what kind. And the problem is the glycemic load varies dramatically from cane sugar to maltose and everything in between.
Right.
And so
lactose. Interesting.
So long story short, my business partner, James, who had been in this industry for 45 years is like, well, why isn't there a sesame milk? When I was a hippie in Houston in the 70s, we made sesame milk and it's delicious. We said, well, that's a good question. I wonder why there isn't. And so we started looking into it, and we asked that question of some top food scientists and beverage development. They're like, oh, I don't know. Why isn't there a sesame milk? So as we started to look into it, we found out a lot of things. Number one, the reason there isn't one is because it's really hard. And the reason it's really hard is because a sesame seed is effectively an oil seed that's oil, and then if you take out the oil, what's left is protein and minerals.
Okay.
It's also a seed that thrives around the world in hot, dry environments. In fact, it's incredibly drought resistant. It's also a fantastic cover crop. So it's often rotated by subsistence farmers who are farming cotton, maybe as their key cash crop, and they want to, the cotton takes the nutrients out of the soil, then they want to prepare the soil for new planting. They can rotate in sesame and grow a crop of sesame, and sesame will fix the nitrogen back in the soil. But the great part about sesame is that it is naturally pest resistant. It doesn't require pollinators. It doesn't need fungicides, herbicides, any of those. Mm-hmm. So it's very cheap.
And not much water. It's
doesn't need water.
Like
doesn't need
miracle
irrigation.
Little nut.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it grows. If you haven't seen a sesame plant, it grows
I have.
So the thing about okra, only like 8 feet tall. So these big leafy stalks that have big pods on them, and the pods, if you slice them open, have a gazillion seeds, much like cacao or another pod. The phrase "open sesame" comes from the natural process of propagation of the seeds. So if you lift them in the field to dry, when the seed pods dry, they will then pop, and you can hear this audible pop sound.
Cool.
Open sesame, and then the seeds will disperse, and that's nature's way of making more sesame. But because they are tall and leafy, they can be gathered by hand harvested, etc. So after you farm the sesame functionally, what do you do with it? The easy thing is to press it for oil. Oil can be sold as a commodity, and then you've got this ultra-rich, ultra-dense pulp remaining. What do you do with it? You throw it out. Or you can use it for animal feed. Now, the thing about sesame being naturally pest resistant is that's because there's a bitter acid in the hull of the seed. Mm-hmm. And that bitter acid means pests don't like it. It also means that...
I would think animals wouldn't like it then either, right?
Some animals don't. Pigs will eat anything.
Pigs will eat anything.
But we've been taking this ultra nutrition dense product, and we have been getting rid of it. Now, it's a key source of nutrition that will grow all over the world. We've farmed sesame for more than 4,000 years, and we've overlooked the most important piece. And so what we did in the end is we tried using the full sesame. You cannot, the sesame milk you make at home, it's got like a 2-day shelf life. It's oil, it'll go rancid, et cetera. I mean, it's fine, it's delicious, but it's not a commercializable product.
Right.
To commercialize it, we started with the pulp. And then we built sesame milk on top of that pulp. And that provided an incredibly nutrient-dense flour. And in fact, what we're able to produce, our core sesame milk has 8 grams of complete protein, all 9 essential amino acids, which the only other milks that have that are soy and dairy. And having all 9 essential aminos at that level means it's comparable to an animal protein, which opens up a whole host of other uses, such as enteral formulas for liquid feeding of patients and things, which is a complex area because if, a lot of people are allergic to dairy and soy and they're sick,
right.
Sometimes the food can make them sicker. So there's all sorts of implications. We've had people who contacted us who are allergists and immunologists who are now able to microdose sesame protein to patients who previously had to eat sesame seeds. There's just, it's very hard to deliver.
Which a lot of people like to eat. It's kind of a... I think my kids love eating, and they somehow can get that out of the seed and they're, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like almost like a nervous kind of thing,
So guess how many sesame seeds are in a liter of sesame milk, though? That's the trick.
I don't know, millions.
20,000.
20,000.
20,000 per liter. So if you're eating sesame seeds, I could get a lot of
it's a lot of sesame
seeds. So this may be...
well, I think it's just a really, really cool product, and I... every time I hear you speak about it, I'm sold. I feel like it's got so many pros to it. It's So I know we're getting tight on time, but there's another thing I wanted to just touch base on because I think it's really cool of, women empowering women. And I love that, you look at your consumer and I think you said 90% of my consumer is women, and I'm going to make my leadership and my board look like my consumer. So touch on that a little bit and about what you feel needs to be accomplished. So it's not tokenism. I like when you talk about,
Yeah, it's interesting because we've kind of gone through, when we had the opportunity to go public, we put together, an all-women board and an all-women C-suite. And like anything, there are some people that are aligned with the skill set and the mission, and there's some people that aren't. And as we've evolved, what we've done is we've opened up the door so we have an environment where people who are women, who are diverse, who have different backgrounds, feel that they're, enjoyed and appreciated based on their skill set and what they bring to the table, which is one of the misalignments that we saw happen in the food industry. But we have also opened up to bringing in the skill set that's needed to navigate, really, really challenging times. And we found what we ended up with, what we look like today, is a combination of strong female leaders and men who value strong female leadership, which is where we started. My three co-founders, were white males, all of whom had strong mothers and had strong daughters. And they all wanted to say, what else can we do here while we're making choices? Because the reason we came together for Planting Hope was not that we wanted to, work our butts off around the clock for years, doing something that was really, really hard and hope that we would achieve it. It's because life's too short not to be doing things that are meaningful with people you enjoy that you think are really going to make a difference. So getting back to the title of your podcast, Owning Your Legacy, we had felt that in some of the things we'd done on our careers, we'd let other people impact those in a way that we didn't love and adulterated what we were trying to produce. So we set ourselves enormous goals. And our enormous goals were everything from, developing sesame milk. We checked all of the boxes. We still can't believe we did that, right? Everything from frothing, foaming, steaming, and rest. These are holy grails that companies around the world have not been able to pull off. In terms of the market sizes they're addressing, they're enormous. And one of the markets that we're looking at now is China. Because there's actually huge opportunities to develop and take our products into China in a way where it's directly aligned with where they're going from a food source and community standpoint, and where the government has set the objectives for better health, better wellness, better sustainability, and the rest. And we're tackling enormous markets, and we're doing so with a team that, especially during, as an entrepreneur, you get unexpected challenges every day.
Right.
Ours has been, as soon as we went public, the capital markets collapsed, and we've been fighting uphill for those for the last 2 years. So what we're doing in terms of achieving our goals is making sure that we're giving all of our employees a place where they feel safe and valued, based on their skill set, and that they're able to work together harmoniously without worrying about why they're being valued. We're all heads down working, bringing things to the table. And the people that thrive in that environment are the ones who get excited about challenges and want to dig in and work
and making
harder.
a difference, it sounds like.
And making a difference is a huge piece of that. I think everybody gets to that point that they're like, okay, I've gotten, my initial bona fides under my career.
Right.
Now what?
Significance.
Yep.
Impact.
Yep.
That's cool.
And what's it all for?
And I think you're so right on the, we need men too. We absolutely do. And it's got to be a we thing. And big part of Female Strong is part of my life. So that really creates the pipeline of young women, because I believe we have to start young, and I'm sure you do too. So is there anything that you do that kind of helps, besides having 4 children, which is a lot.
And like you, growing strong sons,
Yeah,
who are used to seeing women in leadership because, that's the world that they're.
And that makes a difference, for sure.
Huge difference. It's a huge difference. We see that across the board with everybody we interact with. I can tell you, within spending a small amount of time with somebody,
who had a good mom, a good strong mom.
Yeah, that's right. It is right there. For women, it's one way is leading by example, but another is really kind of boiling it down. And the advice that we give in terms of what's tactical and achievable and what really matters. With my kids, I'm spending a lot of my time and effort, and frankly, even budget for their education on the early years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to one of what's currently the top high school in the U.S., public high school, the Illinois Math and Science Academy. And when I went in, I was a fourth class through. It was very new. And folks who have come out of this very small population, only 200 kids go in a year, and then you can't add, so some people leave. So it's very small, even over the 25 plus years the school's been in existence. But people have gone on to create YouTube and PayPal and all sorts of things that we rely on every day, some very smart kids there. But also everybody came in prior to the age of 15. And I will tell you, having gone back to every reunion since, I've been diligent about this. Every 5 years, I see what happens and stay in touch with folks. People have not changed significantly in terms of the core of what made them successful. That tenacity, that ability, that self-confidence, the things that really make a difference. I have never seen where somebody went to college make a significant difference in where they ended up in life. Certainly for certain skills like, you're going to be a doctor, getting that training is incredibly important. And certainly the network you set yourself up with through the people you meet at that pivotal point in your life is very important. But when you look at the people who are truly successful, 20, 30 years down the road, it wasn't exactly where they went to school that determined that. It was the skills and qualities that they developed at an early age.
Go back to that curiosity, continuing to be curious, learning, a continuous learner, and grit.
Grit and communication and salesmanship and tenacity, and once again, tenacity.
Yeah, it's very true. Okay, well, I've loved this conversation. We could go on and on. I really could ask you about 10,000 other things, but next time. So I would love to know on that kind of fits in with that note of what is the legacy that you would like to leave behind?
Honestly, I think about everything. And I think sometimes entrepreneurs get really tied up in, whether their, product is going to be the one that makes a difference and change. And the reality is a lot of what we do from a commercial standpoint is incremental. If you, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, there were 50 different kinds of cell phones, each of which had its own charger. Nobody had the same thing, and there was a new one every minute. That evolution all led to, a common standard in the iPhone. And so, what happens with a lot of, what's driven in entrepreneurship is incrementality. It's leading someplace and it's building on something. So when you talk about lasting legacy, I think at the end of the day, what I go back to is family. And what I want to leave is, really good, strong people who understand how to live their own path in life and go on to create a world that, piece by piece gets better in terms of how we value each other, in terms of how we treat each other, in terms of what we create and bring into the universe from a creative standpoint. The things that are most lasting tend to be, the art and the architecture and, the other music and the other things that are put out there and created. And supporting this kind of growth of the culture in a positive way, as opposed to the many ways you can, spend idle time tearing people apart. And we need to be focused on what we can, really create and
together
to take it there together. Yeah.
And we talk about that a lot of, what's the legacy of our industry, the food industry that all of us that are in it love. It's easy to fall in love with this industry, right? Just good people, good intentioned people, and we nourish the world. So on that note, it's like, and I think it's that innovation and collaboration and working together to solve, just like you said, anything in food can probably be solved if you have the right brains in the room and the right passion and, really wanting to do it. So
the reality is that we are facing some significant challenges in food, and they aren't quite on folks' radar yet. We're living in a little bit of a bubble in terms of those realities. Right now, countries like Indonesia are taking out peat bogs to replace them with rice farming. Rice farming takes a huge amount of water. It contributes to 10% of the methane in the atmosphere. And there are all sorts of inputs. The right rice that we make uses 98% less water than producing rice. Reality is that we have to get in front of these problems in a way that's meaningful, because I don't know about you, but I don't want to give up coffee and I don't want to give up chocolate. So we have to make room to keep those, right? Yep. But we have to expand what we're doing.
I would imagine, Matson, Barb Stuckey at Matson by any chance. She was here and she was talking about the making coffee out of, what was it, you guys, like hazelnuts or something. It was really interesting, but
Yeah.
yeah, they do some cool stuff. And Nature's Find. I don't know if you know Karuna.
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
And
I
I
do.
love her story and
Yeah.
the story of Find, and that it's like these kind of things that we're discovering even still.
Yeah, that's right.
Very
But
good.
number one, they have to be delicious.
Right? They do. That's why Edlong exists. Well, thank you so much, Julia. It's been a pleasure. We really appreciate your time, and I'm glad we
Thank you
got
for the
together.
invitation. Same here.
Yeah.